Coming up on the next Prairie Sportsman, veterans find solace and camaraderie in a cast and blast adventure in western Minnesota.
That's what our goal is, to help them heal.
And we learn about life in the Minnesota River Valley before settlers.
And he spends the winter of 1766, 1767 at Lac qui Parle.
Welcome to Prairie Sportsman. I'm Bret Amundson. We got a great show for you, starting right now.
Funding for Prairie Sportsman is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farm, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota, on the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Live Wide Open. Western Minnesota Prairie Waters. And the members of Pioneer PBS.
On January 14th, 1969, I had a bad day. And that day I was on a convoy, and our convoy was ambushed, and I was taken a prisoner of war.
October 2023. Purple Heart recipients, veterans, members of law enforcement, and their supporters gather at the VFW in Appleton, Minnesota, as part of the first annual Cast and Blast event put on by Warriors and Walleyes Outdoors.
I am going to right now introduce to you guys and gals the Purple Heart recipients that made it to this first annual Cast and Blast.
My goal is to get people to smile and have other people see there's people out there that care for them. That's the goal. There's lots of things we can do in life, but the great outdoors is where it's at.
This event would feature 2 days of hunting and fishing for the veterans.
These events are important, in my opinion, because of the ability to say thank you to guys like this. You know, yeah. I'm sure it's become more common now to thank a veteran, but some of these guys, especially the guys that were in Vietnam, wasn't exactly the case back then. So it's nice to see people going up and thanking them. And I thanked one of the guys here today, and he said, "You don't know how much we appreciate hearing that."
And then I need one guy to go up by the fence sign, and we're just gonna walk. All right, guys, let's go. 9 o'clock, right?
I got 2 minutes still.
Let's go. You love cattails. Come on.
Well, I came here with through Pope County Sheriff's Office. I was a dispatcher, so they invited us along.
Alex Olson, he's worked for the Starbuck Police Department, and Nick. The guys walked into a bad situation. Shots were fired. A friend of ours was killed.
We reached out a little bit further than just military. We brought a couple Pope County guys here that went through an incident here a few months ago, and they need to heal too. You know.
With Alex being on the scene, he did take one round. Nick, you did an awesome job. You really did. And this is great that you guys are honoring these guys for everything that they do, because This profession that we're in is a thankless job. Guys, thank you very much for everything that you do. Greatly appreciate it. Keep doing the job that you are.
What gives them a chance to talk to somebody that's had, you know, a somewhat relatable experience?
Correct, and it's healing. That's what our goal is, to help them heal.
And Rooster. One of the first times I've been out in probably 30 years. So a great opportunity, and really appreciate all what the guys are doing for us.
Good. Let's go. Perfect. First calf, second to 12th. And I did that for 6 months, and then I transferred for door gunner on a helicopter. I did that for the rest of my term. I was at Quan Loy at the time when I went into Vietnam, and that was August 12th is when I got wounded. And I've had the shrapnel ever since. I got shrapnel in my back and in my foot that I've been carrying for ever since.
Hey, Rooster!
But it don't seem to bother a whole lot, so I guess it'll be there until I die.
Hey, nice shot.
Thank you.
You got 2 birds now?
Yep.
All right.
Go to a corner. Yeah, we'll go down to the corner.
And then walk it south.
Yep.
July of '69 to July of '70. I was stationed at Tain N. I flew helicopters, hauling troops in and out of combat situations. Flew approximately 1,150 hours in Vietnam, did a lot of rescue missions, hauling troops in and out, and got shot down once. Really? And I didn't get hurt too bad. I got hurt, but not very bad. This event is just unbelievable. You see the people that come and help. I mean, they volunteer their time, and it's just incredible the work they do for it. Shows appreciation to the fire departments, police officers, and rescue squads. They all need recognition because it's a lot of work, a lot of training, and a lot of times they're away from their families. So we can't forget all them people either.
I never did any of these things. I thought it was for the young guys. I didn't think it was for us Vietnam. And I found out that's almost the opposite. They're happy to have Vietnam guys do it. So it's just kind of a bond. Everyone has been in. Everyone has served. And I think that just brings a natural bond to us. Day I was on a convoy, and our convoy was ambushed, and I was taken a prisoner of war. And I spent 4 years and chained to trees, living in holes in the ground, and later on during the war, they brought us and they put us in cages. But I was held in the jungle in the south. If you want to call it torture, it was psychological. We never was beaten, anything like that. You didn't get a gun butt for being a jerk. But they took care of my wounds. I was hit 4 times. Lucky none of them were really, really bad. I lost my bicep in my right arm, but otherwise, they doctored them up, they took care of me. So when I got back in 73, like say, a lot of Vietnam, my friends, they came back to a different environment than I did because of the protests and things. So I didn't have that, Sometimes it made me feel bad, the attention I got over the other veterans, but it's just the way it is.
We had half the people were fishing this morning, half the people were out here pheasant hunting. And when I say people, I mean these vets that you brought out here, Purple Heart recipients, law enforcement, just a really neat group of people, really interesting group of people. Some of the stories we've heard here are pretty amazing.
Exactly, and those stories would never been told otherwise.
I was always kind of a loner, and this helps get that out. And I think it does help for some people to tell their stories of their experiences. And a lot of people, I've met some people, they're just dying to let it out, but they don't find the right people. And that's, I think, is the nicest thing about them. It gives a chance for someone to maybe open up to them and let out some of the things that might bug them or that they're proud of even, that other people just don't talk about with them.
How many Vietnam veterans do we have in here? Yeah, that's what I figured, quite a few. So to all my veterans here, thank you. Well done. You've really set the stage for what is going on in many of our organizations today.
It's one vet at a time, and above all, I think for all the young guys, veterans, join the service groups, because they're the ones that fight. You young guys, they're still going to be coming up with things that you've experienced, and you've got to have the service organizations there fighting for you.
The Minnesota River that runs through the state's heartland draws its name from the Dakota word Minnesota, meaning cloudy water. The river served as a thoroughfare for the Dakota Nation and fur traders before European settlers arrived. John Robertson, a retired Episcopal priest, manages the historic site at the Lower Sioux Agency, a community of Indian people whose ancestors once traveled along the Minnesota River.
If we look at the petroglyphs, which are 30 miles south of this location or so, is that we know based upon those that this area has been a transportation route for millennia. We have indications that pottery up on Big Stone Lake, Lake Traverse, was in the 1600s, 1700 era. We know that there were things that were resourced in that area. So the Minnesota River was the highway. When the French first made contact with the Dakota, I believe it was the 1620s or 30s, something like that. But there was no things like boundaries as we know them today in terms of nation states. Tribal boundaries or aboriginal boundaries were fluid, and one of the ways that we used to describe it is that your territory was that in which your language and culture had influence. So that sets the early pre-contact Dakota territory from roughly southern Hudson Bay down around into what's the Wisconsin Peninsula or the Wisconsin landmass today, into northern, what's now northern Iowa, eastern North and South Dakota, back up into Canada to Hudson Bay. And the center became around what's now known as Mille Lacs Lake or Spirit Lake. That area was the first center of the Dakota Nation. The Ojibwe were with the French, and one of the stories goes is that the Ojibwe were telling the French that they were those that lived on the river. The French, supposedly, according to myth and legend, thought they were talking about they were the people of the snake, or they were snake. So then we end up with the Ndesu, which is a word that is French for snake, and ends up being Sioux. Then, as the intellectuals disappear and the actual line people, the fur trappers come in, they then began to, and we'll put it in parentheses, married into the Dakota families, realizing that that by doing that, they had a built-in network of access to what they were after, the resource that they were after, which were the furs. So that meant that most of the French participants in the fur trade learned to speak Dakota. They lived as Dakota. During that fur trading time and the development of the emerging colonies and power, there begins to be a shift within the North American landscape in terms of the Aboriginal territories. The center of their universe shifts from Mille Lacs Lake to the mouth of the Minnesota Mississippi River.
The Dakota moved south under pressure from the Ojibwe, which diminished some of their food supplies such as maple syrup, wild rice, and woodland game. The French fur industry brought in much-needed supplies, and trading posts were established along the waterway as far as Lake Traverse.
The fur traders would come in. They were lower-class French people, the voyageurs. Usually they would make a run down the Minnesota River and then down to Prairie du Chien, and that's where the goods would come in, either from what's now Canada, and then they would load them up and then go back up to Lake Traverse. So it was a major trip. They would do their rendezvous, and then they would load up the furs and take them back up, and then they would go out then to Europe from there. And then the goods would come out here and be distributed amongst the Dakota people. So that would be the pots and pans, the hatchets, the iron, the metal, the things that were beginning to make Dakota life livable in the late 1700s or early 1800s.
The British competed with the French for the fur trade and eventually dominated. Historian John Grenier is writing a book about British Commander Robert Rogers, who commissioned cartographer Jonathan Carver to map the region.
Rogers had a grand vision for discovering the Northwest Passage across the North American continent. Carver travels in the fall of 1766, gets all the way up to the Falls of St. Anthony, and his guides tell him that they're not going to go any farther. They're going to return down to the Wisconsin River and winter there. He meets a band of Dakotas, and the Dakotas they invite him essentially to come out to Lac Qui Parle, which is their wintering grounds. It was not a large segment of the Dakota Nation, small family groups. And he spends the winter of 1766, 1767 at Lac Qui Parle. While he's here, he is the first Anglo-American or the first Englishman to learn the Dakota dialect, which is a pretty profound accomplishment. It's one of the great coincidences of early American contact with the Dakota people that Carver learns to speak Dakota at the place called Lac Qui Parle, the lake that talks. And the Dakotas treated him incredibly well, generously, shared their resources and their expertise and their community with him.
After wintering in Lac Qui Parle, Carver went back to the Falls of St. Anthony. He waited for Rogers to send him supplies and an expedition crew, which never arrived.
Robert Rogers often played loose and fast with the facts, and he would promise people things that he knew he could not deliver. So he promised Carver 8 shillings a day, plus food and material for the expedition. The British government never honored Carver's expenses. So Carver died in poverty in the late 1770s in England after he went back to Parliament and submitted his request for refunds of all his expenses.
Shortly after he leaves, that's the beginning of the real ferment in the United States that leads to the Revolutionary War. That then is beginning to shift then the relationship of all the major players in what's now the United States or North America in terms of the relationships between the tribes, the various native nations, and the various foreign powers. During the Revolutionary War, the Dakota people are aligned with the British, and dramatically so. And it becomes even more obvious that alignment in the next war, the War of 1812. The choice becomes between that next group of fur traders who were British because they had taken over the operation of the fur trade from the French. The fur traders just left. They didn't want to be American citizens. And my great-great-great-grandma was married to one of those British fur traders then who refused to become an American citizen after 1812.
The fur trader moved to Canada and left his wife and daughter behind.
And then eventually sends for my great-great-grandma to give her an education in Canada. And that's how she meets the Robertson guy and then comes back to Minnesota. Wow. So that's you know, that era of the fur trade and that transition and the Dakota alignment with the British is played out in my family history.
By 1852, the fur trading era was over, and American homesteaders were settling the land. 1850's treaties relegated the Dakota to narrow strips of land along the Minnesota in exchange for goods, services, and money. Tensions over late payments, corrupt agents, and no hunting woods erupted into the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862. 38 Dakota were hung, and the rest marched to Fort Snelling, then South Dakota. Hundreds died along the way. When the U.S. government agreed to put former Indian lands into federal trust status as a Lower Sioux agency, Dakota started to return home and eventually became a self-supporting community. The Upper Sioux Agency was established as a state park in 1963, and 60 years later, the land was transferred back to the original Dakota community.
As we continue to go forward as a total American culture, or United States culture, society, is that if we are going to make change, if we are going to be able to create a future, that part of what's going to have to, in my opinion, is going to have to be recovered is the spirit that the Dakota, or the understanding that the Dakota people had, the Ojibwe people had, Iowa people had, everybody had that lived in North America, is that this that we're standing on is what we are. And unless we know what we're standing on, then we can't know who we are.
Funding for Prairie Sportsman is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farm, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota, on the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Live Wide Open. Western Minnesota Prairie Waters. And the members of Pioneer PBS.